Aging is quite the prank the universe pulls on animals. Despite everything in space existing for billions of years and actually possibly even projected out towards trillions of years, animals on Earth have just a few decades. Humanity having about 7 to 8 of those if we were lucky. With that said, half of that is spent with the knowledge that we are actually aging, and then everything kind of hurts, and so like pains will spring up, and pretty much everybody's going to hit this at a certain point unless you get taken out of the game early. And once this happens, we are considered to be past our prime. Because of this knowledge that we are actually going to drop, and the fact that when we get past this prime, it kind of boxes us out of a lot of opportunities, many people will try to hold on to their youth at any cost. Me personally, I'm just trying to stay swole and age like Clayton Carmine in Gears of War 5. Or Gears 5, I'm sorry. However, some people want to remain looking young for one reason or another. In the events of The Substance, a company appears to have achieved this. However, there is a cost that if you don't adhere to the rules, it's quite high. By creating a new form of yourself and transferring that consciousness, you can have almost like an avatar of yourself but younger. As one woman is fired from her job for hitting 50 years old, she would turn to the substance in order to regain her youth. But time would continually slip away from her, which then would result in the degradation of her original meat suit. So in today's episode, let's talk about the actual substance, where this other person comes from, why they appear different, and how might this consciousness transfer be accomplished. But first, this episode is sponsored by Helix mattresses. Helix has premium mattresses customized to fit your needs and conveniently shipped to your door, or in my case, my garage. The Helix Sleep Quiz matches you to your perfect mattress based on your body type and sleep preferences. Like for instance, I'm a side sleeper, so that's pretty much why I updated that. And as you can see, the mattress comes rolled up and vacuum sealed, which makes it super easy to set up. Each of these mattresses comes with a 100-night sleep trial to test the mattress out to ensure that you actually like it, and along with that, it comes with a 10-year warranty. Need a mattress but cannot purchase one up front? They have financing options that you can turn to with flexible payments as well. Helix offers you 20 unique mattresses that can fit your sleeping needs, such as the award-winning Luxe and Ultra Premium Elite collections. They have mattresses for big and tall sleepers, kids mattresses for growing bodies, which is actually endorsed by child sleep and medical experts. Personally, I have been sleeping on this mattress for about a week now, and let me tell you something, I didn't know I needed a mattress that bad. I kept waking up on my old mattress with like tight muscles and issues with like pinched nerves, like my arm would be asleep, and in general, just a feeling of fatigue, like I wasn't getting the best night's sleep that I could. After getting this mattress, I feel way more rested and ready to tackle the day, and like both my arms aren't numb anymore when I wake up, which is pretty sweet. And right now, their Black Friday sale is running for a limited time. It's a great time to upgrade your mattress. Visit helixsleep.com/Roanoke and use promo code HelixPartner27 to get 27% off your mattress purchase, plus 2 free pillows, and receive a free bedding bundle with your Luxe or Elite order. All right, let's get back to it. But as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. Roanoke Tales is back up in action, and my god, are the comment sections over there because I used AI generation for thumbnails because I didn't know what else to do. People are pretty pissed. I had to take a marginal break to focus on this channel, Roanoke Games, which has my playthroughs. Also, that stuff has never been stopped. That's also, available and all that good stuff. Join my Discord so we can all vibe out watching movies monthly, and check out my merch at roanokemerch.com, as Christmas stuff will be kind of dropping here soon. So we kick off our story with 12 million different production companies and someone injecting highlighter fluid into an egg. As they do, the entire egg forms a completely separate yolk in a matter of seconds. The heat generation would be insane. A self-cooking egg, if you will. So this level of mitosis isn't actually all that crazy, it's just sped up, which this process would need to take place. But the egg cell is really only one cell, with the largest single cell ever being the ostrich, no, maybe not ever, but currently being the ostrich egg. But it contains half of the DNA it needs, so unless the process of meiosis is basically happening to create this thing, the gametes would actually not undergo mitosis. To do so would wreck this whole thing known as life. So then, why would this be monumental? Well, by doing this would indicate that this highlighter fluid force fires mitosis on something that cannot undergo mitosis naturally. The replicating ability of this fluid itself is absolutely wild, meaning that technically everything could be replicated concerning cells, which will be the basis of my argument for how I believe this material actually works on Elizabeth and why things turn bad so quickly. So we jump over to some men placing Elizabeth Starr on the Hollywood Walk of Fame or whatever it is. Time passes as people see it, but all the while she's aging just as much as the star is. One guy then drops food on it, nice job bro, as we jump over to an aerobic class. Might I suggest some weightlifting? Way better for your bones and actual muscle strength. Actually, literally, I have no idea if any women like age 30 to 50 watch this channel, but if you do, weightlifting is far more viable than like constant cardio. I know men from 30 to 50 watch this channel, so if you aren't lifting, go ahead and start lifting. So as she finishes up her workout, she then heads out into the hallway. This is evidently her legacy. A woman wishes her a happy birthday as she goes to use the bathroom, but the women's is out of order, so she goes to the men's. Heading in after her, Mr. Producer Man over here says he needs a younger woman to take center stage, and he is uncomfortably close to the camera. Elizabeth then comes out realizing that she's aging as well. It does happen. There's lines on my face. It's the only game in town. So now, as always, it's a discussion worth having, because once you realize what it actually is, you realize probably someday our species will not have to deal with this anymore. Aging is nothing more than the degradation of your genetic coding. That's literally it. Eventually, your cells will reach the Hayflick limit, which is said to be about 40 to 60 divisions, if I'm remembering that correctly, and then they will stop dividing as the DNA has been too damaged to continue on. At the end of your chromosomes exists something known as telomeres, which are repeating patterns of genetic coding. This was once called junk DNA, but we have now realized there is actually important coding in there that does actually affect gene expression, and this coding will have a little bit of it chopped off each time your cell divides. Is that not the most annoying thing? No matter what, your cells have to divide. We have a clock ticking because our cells cannot stop themselves from messing up. I mean, I get it. Life must continue to adapt, and if you live forever, you don't really adapt. But come on, man, 80 years? Of course, there's an argument to be made that life is as much neurological as it is physical. Say, like, if we had 160 years, it may sound like enough, but the reality is we spend so much time just filling our time, that might not feel like enough either. Sort of like when we used to drop in our 30s, we would have probably killed for 80 years. I'm 32 now, which means I'm a wise elder by caveman standards. Let me show you how to properly hunt a mammoth. Anyhow, as the cells divide, mistakes also happen in the actual replication of important genes as well. So with the telomeres being cut off and mistakes building up the genes of a person, eventually what happens is a cell has too many damaged critical genes and can no longer properly function. This leads to aging and the actual biological death of a person. So if we were to somehow fix this damage by using a template, then we really could keep ourselves alive, and with that, we would not age. Of course, nothing stops you from dying in other ways like car accidents or illness, but if we could replicate an entire genome, illness probably wouldn't be an issue either. But Roanoke, I can hear you saying, how would we fix the entire genome? Straight up easy mode. You already have a ready-made template that is mostly the same from when you were born. Neurons within the brain. Their lifespan is only limited by the maximum lifespan of your body. So unless you have some neurodegenerative disease, your neurons can exist for longer than our lifespan allows. That's how ridiculous aging is. It's our bodies that fail, not our minds in most instances. If you could take the genome of a neuron and reapply it to the body as the template of the cell needs to have the original genes activate, congrats. You no longer have a biological death, and that's how you defeat aging. The only thing that separates humanity from this is literally our technology level. So eating lunch with Mr. Producer Man, he then moves through a ton of shrimp. God, that was disgusting. As he then talks about how 50, or at least at 50, renewal stops. Technically, aging is a gradual process. The idea actually that you're 28 and you start dying isn't true. You just become aware you're going to die. Thanks for watching. This is really an uplifting episode, isn't it? Anyhow, so then she heads home seeing one of her billboards is being torn down, as then she gets T-boned and passes out. The doctors then x-ray her and find nothing, saying she's very lucky and then she can go home. She then sort of breaks down as the doctor runs off because he says, oh, I have an emergency, but really doctors aren't great with emotions, so, you know, kind of comes with the turf. The nurse then listens to her heart and then feels on her spine and tells her that she's a good candidate. And as she heads out, I mean, there still could be a brain bleed that wouldn't show up on an x-ray yet, which is kind of wild that they didn't keep her for at least some observation. So walking out, she feels in her pocket and then finds something called the substance with a note that says it changed his life. A man named Fred then shows up, who was in her 10th grade homeroom, as he asks her out for a drink. Heading home to her luxury penthouse, she then plugs in the USB into the TV, and we get this info ad about the substance unlocking your DNA that will release another version of yourself. Very interesting. So she walks off and then drops that in the trash because it's basically nonsense. Then heading to the bar, she drinks way too much and then ends up losing all of that, as then she looks through her trophies and random things and yearns for the old days. Heading over to the trash, she then pulls out the USB and gives the number a call. She says she'd like to order it, as then she doxes herself, 1057 Beverly Canyon. Someone write that down. The voice then gives her an address and hangs up. Waking up, she then heads to the shower and then pops some Alka-Seltzer. Relatable. Then looking at the casting calls, she sees one about who wants to be the next Elizabeth, as then she finds mail from the substance as well. A card with 503 has showed up, and then she sees the address. Heading over, it sketches all get out. Definitely a good way to lose a kidney. Approaching the entrance, no shot. She then uses the card to open the door, as it only opens halfway. Crawling in, she enters a perfect white room with some lockers. Finding 503, her box is in there. Taking it home, home, she finds an activator that says it's single use. Then she finds a stabilizer and food for herself. Stabilizer needs to be used every day, which is going to require her spinal fluid, and a switch back into her original body must take place every 7 days. Looking at her body, again, I cannot show any of this, and filling the syringe with highlighter fluid, she injects it quickly, finding the vein, which is actually fairly impressive. I would have definitely mutilated my arm. Completing the task, she then turns around as the room spins and she falls down. She rides around on the ground for a while as her body starts convulsing under the skin. A new pupil and iris forms as it then heads back into her body. Her back then opens up and her consciousness is transferred into this new form. Coming to, she then stands up but cannot hear all that well, and then looking at her old body, she is dazed as she sees herself in the mirror. She is younger now and her eyes have turned blue. Looking back at her old body, it's just sort of laying there as then she pukes up even more highlighter fluid. Sealing up the spinal column of her old meat suit, she injects a 7-day food into that body. So now you have a lifeless husk on the ground there. You should probably attempt to keep that thing warm, right? Like, it's your old body, you're going to need that. So she practices talking as then she starts bleeding out of her nose. The stabilizer, you fool! Seeing it's a really large syringe, it's basically a spinal tap. She then draws out the cerebral spinal fluid and injects herself as she stabilizes. So you know why we are here. Let's discuss what is happening and how this may work. So given what we saw at the beginning, this is a massive context clue for what is taking place concerning her own gametes and somatic cells. Gametes being the sex cells and somatic cells being the cells of your body, and to understand that, we need to understand the difference between meiosis and mitosis. Meiosis is what produces sperm and eggs. There are two distinct phases that take place in order to create the daughter cells and the granddaughter cells. With the initial phase, that'll create the two daughter cells with 23 chromosomes. The second phase will actually allow for a crossover event known as a recombination to diversify the chromosomes, which are then pulled apart to create 4 granddaughter cells that are genetically going to be different from one another. This process is crucial as genetic diversity prevents any one disease from completely wiping out another species, as genes are different from the original cells. So meiosis forms a new human and genetically must be different. Mitosis, on the other hand, replicates the somatic cells, and its goal is to maintain as much of the original DNA as possible. Of course, it will fail in keeping 100% of the DNA, which results in aging. Way to go, DNA polymerase, you friggin' nerd. So I believe what we see with this new person is a combination of Elizabeth's own sex cells and her somatic cells. And given that Sue, as she will become to known, has blue eyes instead of hazel, it's clear some new genetic coding must have been used apart from her somatic cells that Elizabeth actually has. The activator appears to use the eggs that Sue possesses. In males, sperm would be used, meaning Sue is related to herself. The somatic cell information would then fill in the missing information from using the egg, which is the other half of the genome. The activator forces this combination, but how it would be selective to prevent maladaptive traits from forming, given that it's almost the purest form of, I don't even really know if I can say this on YouTube. Basically, when a brother and sister love each other very much, that process is basically this process. Essentially, actually, it's even more closely linked than that process because it's your own genome. So essentially what it appears like is that this genome, taken to a degree, is taken from the somatic cells, which weirdly enough forms another iris and pupil, as May mentioned, but also this information will be taken from the egg where this new person is formed, but in forming them, it seems like the traits appear first. So because of that, then it appears the egg genome actually replaces half the information in the somatic cells during the replication process. So it goes, activator takes information from egg, which then is implanted in the somatic instead of the somatic being implanted into the egg. So this produces an entirely different person within Elizabeth. Now, how this wouldn't cause a person to explode is beyond me. Physically, a person cannot exist within another person without there being so much pressure on the cells next to them. Considering the average adult female has 28 trillion cells, they would now have 56 trillion? Quick maths. This pressure would then cause mass cell death in reality. And this would indicate that everywhere, all at once, the new, younger genetic coding of the egg is applied to half the cell, causing new phenotypic traits to form as each somatic cell replicates with this new information to essentially form someone half the age of Elizabeth. But the next question is, how does this consciousness transfer work, and why does she need the spinal fluid? Well, we'll talk about that momentarily. Practicing her aerobics once more, she then sees the ad to become the next Elizabeth Sparkle. Ayo, is that a Cutlass in the background? Now, I believe that is a 1970 Cutlass Supreme 442, which, at least that's what headcanon says anyway. These bad boys had a 455 cubic inch V8 engine, which produced around 370 horsepower. With its forced air induction through tubing actually from the front grille, it was able to actually get proper cool air, which would help it run better, considering it's naturally aspirating essentially. And believe it or not, it was rather light given its fiberglass hood and lightweight insulation. This is the golden era of American muscle. Now, granted, the 1967 Impala that was 3 years prior to that, that's my personal favorite. That's what's kind of sitting in my garage right now. God, I love that car. Anyways, heading to the auditions, Elizabeth then shows up as she refers to herself as Sue. The producer man then shows up as they get ready to sign a contract as they are going to hire her. Sue then tells them she has to be out of town every other week for her mother because she's sick apparently. Walking back home, she injects herself with the stabilizers and is now just a giant montage of her reaching her fame once more. Is nobody looking for Elizabeth at this point? Also, again, how is her body not hypothermic? Reaching the end of the week, the food then runs out as Elizabeth has to switch back into her old body once more. This food, as it's called, doesn't appear to be food, but must work as some sort of stasis for the body. While the consciousness is gone, how the body does not become hypothermic indicates something strange is happening. It doesn't appear to really age unless too much spinal fluid is used, as we will see, and it must allow for chemical reactions in the body to take place to keep the cells alive, but we really don't see her breathing either. Although it's very likely the brainstem is still functional, she's just in a vegetative state as the cerebrum is no longer firing. Here's kind of the problem with all of this, right? If it's stasis and then the body is no longer like functioning, I guess is the best way to say it, which means there's no chemical reactions, no enzymatic processes, that's basically going to allow for any type of opportunistic infection to kind of move in and start breaking her down. So you would need the immune system to still function, which means the heart has to still be pumping and the body must still be doing something. So that's going to use energy, which means maybe the food provides the energy, but why would she not be breathing to provide the energy? Essentially, you just can't have one without the other. But from what we will see, once you run out of this stuff, the body rapidly ages, like ridiculously fast. So perhaps it's a genome stabilizer while the body is unconscious. Once it's used up, the body will actively destroy its own DNA. And the purpose of this may be that the activator is still present to a degree, which means recombination events are actually happening in the somatic cells as well, which will cause the body to receive massive genetic damage because this is like a blender in your DNA. It's not a great time. Also, I just want to point out, stay on the bathroom floor. For a week, buck nude. She's going to be freezing waking up. So as the transfusion starts, Sue then passes back out as her consciousness rides the motorcycle of thought as she wakes back up and pushes off her old new body. And oh, let me guess, you're probably not going to just leave that one laying on. What, you did? Wow, way to take care of yourself. So giving get food though, Elizabeth then heads back into work as producer man shows up as she's fired on the spot. What a way to come back. Filling out her calendar, I assume she's going to be receiving more of these materials to stay function. And as she gets her mail, her deposit box has been delivered. She gets the food matrix and now it just becomes about chilling out until she can switch again. The purpose of this, as we will come to find out, is to allow for the spinal fluid in your body to regenerate. Supposedly. I don't really buy it. I think it's a different thing that has to regenerate, but in the human body, you have about 150 milliliters of spinal fluid at any given point in time, with about 125 milliliters in the brain space as it provides nutrients, cooling, and supports the brain, and about 25 milliliters in the ventricles. Your body can produce around 0.2 to 0.7 milliliters of this stuff every minute, which is around 500 to 700 milliliters per day. And this indicates to me the food matrix puts the body, it has to be in stasis after a week. Like your body would have no issue keeping up with the demand of spinal fluid, but without the body actively doing anything, spinal fluid is not replenished. At least that's what I'm going to have to assume. But again, I think it may be something else. We'll kind of talk about that when we kind of get to the whole consciousness transfer. But when the stasis runs out, cellular damage is incurred at a rapid rate, almost like pieces of the body are dying, as we will see. And it is now next week, and everyone is young and fun. Personally, as stated, I'm just trying to age like Marcus Phoenix or Clayton Carmine, get swole, stay swole, and just, I don't know, grow some tomatoes. So watching TV, the woman is wild for leaving herself just laying on the cold floor. The spinal wound is healing up pretty nice though, and realizing she can't just leave herself there, finally, she starts knocking out the walls to find a hollow point. Oliver then shows up angry as he hasn't slept in 3 nights because, you know, she's been building, so everyone is tripping over themselves to speak because apparently she's super beautiful. Like, rise above the ape brain, bro. Like, learn to talk to women. One day I may accomplish that myself. So she used this week of youngness to construct this false wall and then this room behind it. It's just a dark room where your original meat suit lays. Like, that's really depressing. Why not even remotely try to keep it warm? Talk about not liking yourself. So now it's just a montage of aerobic exercises. I mean, if you can call it that. Like, a good chunk of this movie is basically that YouTube video, Call on Me, if I'm being 100% honest. So Sue then heads outside to drink some water as she looks at herself, because as one does, she now puts on some party clothes as she tells the original meat suit she won't be out late, so don't eat too fast. As her body lays there though, it is eating quite fast as the last little bit of material starts going away. Getting home, I'm not really sure if this would technically be a cougar scenario. This dude is like way younger than her in consciousness age, but physically they're the same age, or at least similar. So as they start getting frisky, however, Sue then starts destabilizing as she realizes her original body is about done with the food, and her new body hasn't had a shot of spinal fluid in a while. She realizes that she's got to go switch back, but instead decides to take more spinal fluid just for a little while, at least a couple of hours. As the dude then goes to unzip the backing, a bunch of meat falls out. Except Elizabeth, original trademark, wakes up seeing that she did in fact change back. Elizabeth then goes to look at the message left for her. As she checks it though, her fingers are now super old. So you can change to being young at an increased genetic consequence if the food runs out. Elizabeth then calls up saying she's 503 and she had a few extra hours that were used by accident, which led to her hand aging. The guy then tells her, no, you're one and the same. There is no, like, Elizabeth was like, oh, well, she was drunk, so obviously it should be okay. Like, no, like, it's not how genetics work. You guys are the same, and you're just trying to shirk the responsibility. I'm like, what are they supposed to do? It's kind of funny how she literally tried to blame her new self for screwing over her old self, but then make an excuse for her. You know what this reminds me of? When they cut the corpus callosum in the human brain, the left brain will actually lie, and then I believe the right brain will try to make up an excuse as to why it lied, because it has no idea why it was lying. Very strange stuff. I might have those reversed, but basically that's what happens with your brain. Two consciousness appear to form. So now she's got an old lady hand permanent. That sucks. So the spinal fluid, if you're not aware, actually contains a small number of neural stem cells. This is what I believe stabilizes the new body for all intents and purposes, and those have to regenerate. So it's not necessarily the fluid, it's the amount of neural stem cells that is contained within that fluid. Neural stem cells likely do not have that much genetic damage, given that neurons are not as rapidly dividing as other cells respectively. And this would seem to indicate that the new body is massively unstable concerning its own genetic profile. This would help to explain the nosebleed and the ringing in the ears, as the cells are undergoing apoptosis because they just don't know what to do. So the question is, why is it this unstable? Well, with this combination of coding as described, it should be able to survive, right? But there seems to be a massive issue of potentially critical genes existing in a stable state. For instance, the original body can survive without the new body, but the new body cannot survive without the old. While consciousness can be transferred to the new body does not appear to have consciousness, at least early on. As we will see, this will change as time progresses and a tipping point is reached, but this means the body is functional only as long as it is stabilized by that original genetic coding. The activator in the body clearly affects the old body's genetic profile if stasis runs out and the consciousness is not returned in time. The new body appears to have this activator in it also, given that it shows up at the beginning when she kind of throws it up, but without an attachment to the old body, the activator will destroy the new body even with consciousness in it. So bear with me, as this is a fairly complex bit of genetic functionality, so I'm sort of also figuring it out as I go along. So if it sounds like I'm running through things to you, it's because I actually am. Regardless, it appears the neural stem cells within the cerebral spinal fluid are actually responsible for stabilizing this new body, potentially given that the activator is using a template to apply to the cells to allow them to survive. But without the template, the genetic coding of the new body is completely unstable, which would cause them to devolve into a mass of fluids and goo, which we will talk about here in a little bit. So Elizabeth then cleans up her house as she sees herself on TV, which is basically just soft core at this point. So getting a ring at the door, Oliver comes over trying to get her to come out, but it's Elizabeth's original formula, so she doesn't answer. Elizabeth then heads back to get her refill, as then she hears something which freaks her out, as then she runs to a restaurant. A waitress then takes her order as a man is like, "It's long, isn't it?" He then mentions the 7 days thing, and he is apparently doing the same thing as her. The old man was the nurse from earlier, and he says he's having some mental issues coping with his own existence as an older man because he feels worthless because he's younger every other week. He then asks if she started eating at her yet, which then freaks Elizabeth out as she takes off. Elizabeth then runs into her boy toy from the night before, who's like a total jackass for one reason or another. Is that another cutlass? Heading back home, Elizabeth then finds Fred's number as she keeps it because she wants to connect with someone, as then she calls him up. Fred agrees to go on a date with her as she covers up her old lady fingers and gets dressed to go. And in the immortalized words of Shaggy, "Life's one big party when you're still young, but who's gonna have your back when it's all done?" The point of that statement is this: we're all gonna get older. So yeah, when you're young and in your 20s and possibly 30s, yeah, it's a huge party, man. But eventually, we all get saggy. Who's gonna stick by you when you're saggy, Shaggy? Probably somebody that you formed a commitment to and you actually love them, hopefully. So going to check on the new and improved meat suit, it's just sort of vibing out sleeping. Elizabeth then goes to look at herself as she gets ready to go. Leaving 20 minutes before a date in California, that's a hell of a move. Grabbing her keys, she then looks at a billboard outside before checking herself out again. She's feeling mildly self-conscious as she keeps reapplying more makeup, and she can't seem to leave as like, that she just Joker wipes it off her face. What you doing there, gal? So she ignores her date and decides to stay in. Fred deserves justice is all I'm saying. We now jump over to Sue as she does a squat, as then she feels something move out of place. They stop filming this weird aerobic situation as then she goes to her dressing room to see what that was. Locking the door, she finds a mass under her skin, and as she pushes it up towards her belly button, she starts digging into her belly button. That's not how a belly button works, but then she's able to grab it. She pulls out a chicken leg, and as she wakes up, Sue sees that her original body ate a ton of chicken, like a lot of chicken, like the amount of chicken I'm eating because I'm protein bulking. So probably need some fluids and proteins to replenish all that spinal fluid and cellular mitosis. So calling the substance place, they again inform her that she is making the decisions. The consciousness is not split. Heading into the aerobics place, they have canceled the taping that day as Sue's then told to go to the producer man's office. Heading in, the producer then turns around and he says they can't keep her on the morning show. Ratings are through the roof. Producer man then says he wants her to host the New Year show. Being promoted, hopefully that falls on the right week. Taking more spinal fluid, that's starting to look infected there as Elizabeth then wakes back up, finding she's looking really old now. Her foot is totally screwed. Elizabeth then calls a substance place saying that more time is being stolen from her. The man then asks her if she wants to stop and go back to herself, but she will be stuck like this. Elizabeth says that she can't stop at this point, but a balance needs to be respected. Elizabeth then sits depressed as hell there as a much older and gnarly leg, like what is that, rheumatoid arthritis? That's not ideal. So she has to basically unfreeze up her leg to get it to bend properly. Good Lord. Take her glucosamine. Grabbing the book, it's a French cuisine book, and as she looks through it, her eyesight is also starting to go. Watching Sue on TV, Elizabeth then goes to make some food. Elizabeth appears to be kind of losing the connection that she is Sue, because then she's like jealous of her. She has completely negated the balance and the understanding that it's her. This is some real next level getting lost in the sauce, I'm pretty sure. Making eggs in the worst way possible, Sue then shares a beauty secret with everyone. Elizabeth continues to lose it as she starts covering up her window with newspaper. Sue now wakes up seeing that Elizabeth basically has completely lost it and a dichotomy is forming. She starts filling jars of spinal fluid. Like, you do not have that much to take that like often from her. That is way too much. So here's the problem with all of this. In doing this, it highlights again that the activator is causing this genetic instability in both the old and new body, which is the nature of the beast, seeing as it must recombine your genetics to make the new person. By taking this much spinal fluid, this would then allow for her to exist much longer, but without giving the old body a chance to allow its genetics to restabilize, meaning that the genome would be degrading consistently, which we're about to see the effects of that, and whoo boy, talk about messed up. So it now has been 3 months. That cannot be good. She has some swole dude in there with her, as then she heads into the room to pull more from the old lady. What she gets is kind of desiccated brown spinal fluid that is clearly having some sort of issues, and it's too late to go back now, really. Sue then calls the substance place, and she says there is no more stabilizer fluid, as the voice tells her, well, you have to switch back. There's no other option. As she crawls back into the bathroom, Soldier Status hears her, as then she goes to check her on her, because she just kind of locked herself in the bathroom. Elizabeth then emerges as she locks the door, and Elizabeth looks like what she's become. Wow, it's the guy from Tusk. The reality is, I have no idea how she would even be alive at this point. Her genetic profile would have been so degraded to cause this type of, I guess, physicality that she basically would have just become a cancerous mass. Along with this is clear the spinal infection, given that the stabilizer fluid is brown. Like, all of this is not looking really good for her. But don't you worry, your pretty striped head. It's gonna get way worse. She then tells him to get out, as then he runs off grabbing his stuff and then leaves the apartment. She calls a substance place saying that she wants to stop, and they say they will deliver it, and she looks at herself as, man, she is screwed. So heading outside, her last kit is delivered. Going to pick it up, she is now like an 800-year-old person, but she's still pretty strong. Grabbing the termination shot, she hears in her head that once she terminates her, she cannot go back. Stabbing it into Sue's heart, she plunges the plunger to take her out, but the call of being young is too much. She stops before pushing it all the way in, as she says she needs Sue and she hates herself. She begins performing CPR on her as a ton of blood starts leaking out. She then goes to switch into her body as she goes directly into her heart, as Sue then throws up blood and both both wake up at this point. Sue sees a termination needle as she becomes quite pissed at this, as it becomes a game of keep away. Sue then kicks Elizabeth into the painting as Elizabeth smashes a glass vase on her head. Running to the bathroom, Sue then kicks the door, can't get it open at first, but then finally breaks through, knocking Elizabeth down. Holding her up to the mirror, she starts smashing Elizabeth's head into it, and for some reason, she is able to survive this, but is pretty badly injured. Elizabeth then goes to crawl away as Sue Spartan kicks her, like, brother, why is she so strong? Sue then starts beating the holy hell out of her as Sue is forced to remember they are one. You're only hurting yourself. So I'm pretty sure Elizabeth is totally gone at this point, as Sue has a nice cry over it. With this, we now see, interestingly, two people have formed out of this, and I believe this was because of the rules that were violated. The neural stem cells appear to at first create a link between Elizabeth and Sue, and I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me as we were talking about consciousness transfer, which is not really an exact science, but there are ideas, I guess you could say, on how it works. So, what is consciousness? Some would say it's just our brains operating. Others would say we are more of a conduit for consciousness, which I know, it's pretty wild. The idea stands for the concept of how do we know what we're thinking about or going to think about before we even know what we are going to think about? How do I know that I want to say these specific words before I even wrote them down? Could be the progression of communication, could be something else. It's really impossible to tell, but something, let's put it this way, right? When you have a conscious thought, one of the neurons somewhere has to fire and know what it's trying to do. How does it know what it's trying to do? How does one cell know what the thought needs to be? That's kind of why consciousness is very, very strange once you start getting into the physical neurology. But wherever consciousness stems from, or whether it be completely organic or something more, we know for a fact our neurons fire, and from that, thought is maintained. Because of this, the neuronal stem cells may have a dual purpose, but what does not make sense is why it would cease. When the consciousness is transferred, it is accomplished by the neuron's regular firing through the spinal cord. Knowing that the spinal cord actually is more than just a bridge, it appears somewhat that you can think with your spinal cord. So Sue has compatible neurons, as does Elizabeth, which I think I need to kind of explain that for a second. Thinking with your spinal cord, basically a guy severed his spine in the lower lumbar area, I believe it was, like completely severed. And if the spinal cord were just a bridge, then by thinking to move and all that stuff, the information gets sent down to the spinal cord to walk, motor neurons, all those fun things, then that means it would just originate from the brain. But they were actually able to attach a spinal activator to the damaged portion of his spinal cord below where the break was, and then he was able to think about moving his feet, and he was able to move his feet. So, well, I think it was actually more his toe, but the point is that by thinking about it, he was still able to use the spinal cord to actually still move his toe. The nervous system is absolutely insane, but that's not what we're here to talk about completely. Just thought I would tell you to kind of clarify that. So back to what I was saying. Sue has compatible neurons, as does Elizabeth, so the chemical signatures are the same and communication is maintained. It appears, though, that with Sue, her consciousness needs to be force started by Elizabeth's consciousness being transferred through the firing of her neurons. How this returns is beyond our understanding of the brain currently, but it appears there is a point when the consciousness has existed in the brain of Sue for so long that the firing pattern is known to the neurons, so then she wakes back up. Basically, Elizabeth's consciousness is imprinted on this new brain. So while yes, she is her, Elizabeth original is destroyed, she still is the same person. Sue then heads to the studio to get ready to host the show. She starts getting that tinnitus that I get sometimes, which is mega annoying, as then she starts coughing. She has no stabilizer fluid as her source is gone. She then coughs up a tooth, bummer bro, as she's going to be falling apart quite quickly. And it's a front tooth as well. In fact, all of her teeth begin falling out at this point as she starts systematically removing them and coughing up blood. So she gets an absolutely insane idea. Use the activator on her clone. Producer Man then runs up with the shareholders as Sue smiles at them as they all run off to follow the other women that just passed by. Heading to the elevator, this gal is literally falling apart at the seams as then her ear falls off next. Running outside, her vision starts going next as her eyes are falling apart too. She enters the bathroom and grabs the activator. She injects herself with the activator, saying, "Give me something beautiful," as she actually does form a new version of herself. It transfers her consciousness as she wakes up from her old body, except she's completely a disfigured monster. Basically, you cannot make a copy of a copy. This is the result. Everything is in the wrong place this time. She is now the monster known as Elizu. New arc just dropped. She throws up as she then heads to the window. She's technically alive, but she is absolutely not enjoying the life of this thing. She covers up the pained face on her back as she gets ready to host a New Year's show. With Operation Cannot Go Horrifically Wrong engaged, she starts stabbing her old pictures as she puts on the mask of her old face. Well, this is a total mental breakdown. Lumbering back to the party, she enters the stagehands. Apparently don't notice anything wrong. In fact, nobody does, except it was all hallucination, but somebody had to let her in, right? So as the women head on stage, wait, there are younglings in this crowd? Like, these are topless dancers. Okay, well, it's California. So as the lights go out, everyone then sits and waits for Elisu as the music from the Monkees Finding a Computer starts playing. Sitting there, everyone begins looking at what is on the stage with them as she goes to talk about saying how happy that she is that she's here. The paper mask then slips off, revealing what she is as Elisu has a bunch of organs fall off from her head. One woman screams as everyone else starts doing the same. They start yelling, "Shoot the monster." She says that she's Sue as they call her a freak and then throw her around like a baby in a dryer. She then falls face down, saying it's her as one guy then swings at her head and takes it out. A new one then forms with several more faces as, good lord, her arms begin falling off. So everyone in the general vicinity gets sprayed and prayed with the old red blood cells. She spins around as everyone gets hit as she's got a cannon on her arm apparently, and then heading outside, she is completely falling apart as she trips and is nothing but a mass of flesh. Her original face then detaches from the rest of her body as it crawls away the Thing style, making its way to the star. She then comes to a rest looking up the sky as she sees light and glitter as she then melts into a fluid. The next day, a street sweeper cleans her up, leaving just a star as her memory, and thus concludes the substance. So to wrap this bad boy up, why did she turn into that thing at the end? I think with her dissolving into the fluid, it's pretty clear what happened. Upon using the activator on her secondary body that already had a highly unstable genome, she basically created another version of herself that would be equivalent to several levels of brother-sisterly love that would then cause massive issues with phenotypic presentation. Think of like a Habsburg jaw times 100. This would in turn cause her to appear massively disfigured, with her body being a genetic soup. As the activator remained within her system with no stabilizing factor, this would continue to mix up her genetics, basically causing cells to begin undergoing apoptosis at a massive rate towards the end. As time progressed, collagen fibers would break down, bones would be brittle, muscles would become weak, allowing for the body's cohesion to fail, which caused her to basically break apart essentially. All in all, what a ride, beginning to end. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like as always is appreciated as it gets the video out there, and subscribing lets you know occasionally when I post. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Roanoke Games, Roanoke Tales channel links, as well as Patreon. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, massive thank you to our astronaut, Tristan Kessick. Thank you, my man. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And I'd like to thank our scientists, Eris, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Lucian Dragon, Metric System, Official Texan, and Virix Hellstrom. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I do appreciate y'all's help. It goes a long way towards keeping everything running smoothly and without issue. All right. Again, as mentioned prior, I'm revamping all the Patreon tiers, so just keep a lookout for that. But that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll see y'all in the next one.